Salutations, respected viewers. I am George from Ireland, and this video is about the Ukrainegate impeachment hearings, Donald Trump, and so forth, the American political scene at the moment. So I'm going to give a fairly extensive background to the Ukraine conflict, going to give you a synopsis of what happened in these Ukrainegate hearings, and hazard a guess as to where do we go from here, what's going to happen with his impeachment, and so forth. So some of this, well, I'll be telling my grandmother how to suck eggs. Right? Ukraine is a country in Eastern Europe, and the Republic of Ukraine became independent in 1991. It had previously been part of the Soviet Union, so had Russia. Ukraine had been part of the Russian Empire prior to 1917. Though if you go back further than that, it was sometimes part of Poland, or at least much of it part of Poland. Some of it was part of a Tatar state. The Tatars speak the Tatar language, distant related to Turkish. They are Muslims, things like that. Some of Ukraine part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire for a while, and Ukraine has been briefly independent a few times in its history. So the birthplace of Russia is not Moscow; it's Kiev, as in the capital of Ukraine. And Russia only became a a Christian country in 985 A.D., and that was when Vladimir converted them to Christianity, or the ruler said, "You must." Typical Russian style, no choice. Okay, some Western potentates did likewise, except the Ukrainians call him Volodymyr, and so they're often Ukrainian language versions of these names. And was he Russian? Was he Ukrainian? I suppose it's debatable. I know Russians will say, "Oh, well, they only split off when they're conquered by the Poles, and their language, their Russian, acquired some Polish accretions, and they were Polonized and colonized as well." So it's all debatable. But much of the Ukraine conflict comes down to Russian nationalists often not accepting that Ukraine is a proper country at all. I mean, it's only been a country since the 15th century. Okay, so many countries have been created since then. So there's this ludicrous argument. I know Russian government officials several years ago said that the independence of countries like Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia may not be legal. It needs to be reviewed and things like that. Which obviously I think is disgraceful. It's obviously trying to provide an excuse for aggression. But my goodness, I'm kind of low on battery in this thing, so I'm trying to look for my special cord for that. As I'm going on, I really don't want to interrupt the flow of this, but I might have to go off camera for a minute. How embarrassing is this? Want to keep going with it whilst I am searching for the special white cord. Oh my goodness, where on earth is it? And not that many people, nobody's watching at the moment, so I suppose it doesn't really matter in this long video. Where in I'll just turn it like that whilst I take a look. See. Okay, sorry, finally sorted, and keep on going. So that what was happening. That's what was happening with Ukraine and all that. So like most countries, it's passed through many hands, and not been part of the same polity throughout its history. Ugh. So anyway, Ukraine, when it became independent, most recently, 1991, it was a nuclear weapon state because the Soviet Union had nuclear arms, and some of those were stationed in Ukraine. So the Republic of Ukraine could have retained nuclear weapons, but it agreed to give them up in return for guarantees for its territorial integrity, and various countries, the United States, the UK and Russia, all agreed to respect that and to help defend Ukraine. Otherwise, Ukraine could have kept its nuclear weapons. It would have given them a great deal more clout. You can bet your bottom dollar the Russian Federation would never have dared to invade them if they had nuclear arms, and Russia is most certainly invading the Ukraine and been illegally occupying a lot of its territory for 5.5 years now. Of course, Moscow will lie and lie and lie and tell the most absolutely barefaced, flagrant, provable lies on this issue, just like Donald Trump, which is no doubt why he likes Putin so much. So I don't want to go through all the machinations, but there was a guy called Yanukovych, who was a pro-Moscow candidate for the Ukrainian presidency way back in 2004. So obviously in the Soviet era, first of all, obviously there was the Bolshevik Revolution 1917. Ukraine was briefly independent after that. Lenin said if they want to be independent, they can be independent. Lenin suddenly changed his mind about that and had Russia invade and defeat the Ukrainian nationalists. Not all Ukrainians want to be independent. As with most nationalities, it's debatable who's Ukrainian and who's not. Some people were Ukrainians regard themselves as a type of Russian, others did not, and so on. And the Ukrainians have sometimes fought against the Poles. Now, from a Western European perspective, I might say, what's the difference? You more or less are Polish. It's a bit like telling us in Ireland that we are English. And even me, a unionist, would say, I'm not. I mean, I'm not offended by that, just I'm not anti-English, but there we are. And it's partly the thing to do with the Orthodox Church, that Eastern European type of Christianity. So some Ukrainians are uniates, which is to say Western Ukraine was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In the early 18th century, the emperor said, oh, you should be Catholics. So they became Catholics nominally, but they carried on their Eastern Rite Christianity. Yes, the Pope is the head of their church, but it's still a Catholic style of, still an Orthodox style of worship. And there are other things. I mean, recently, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church became autocephalous. That's to say, it has its own head, as in split from the Russian Orthodox Church. Now, despite being officially a secular country, in Russia, the Orthodox Church is little more than an arm of the state, and it's been that for centuries, certainly since Peter the Great got it under his thumb. I know the communists viciously persecuted Christianity of all kinds. Sent hundreds of thousands of believers to the Gulag, where they labored in the most savagely cruel conditions, and executed tens of thousands of nuns and priests, requisitioned so many churches and used them for other purposes, blew some of them up. Now, of course, Putin is completely two-faced, is an absolute scumbag, saying that he believed in communism and he believed in Christianity, despite these two things being at loggerheads. But anyway, the Orthodox Church was never totally finished off under the communists. Bizarrely, they always allowed a handful of churches to function. Obviously, from the Second World War, they and yes, there were a few priests, but they had to be agents for the communist government. And really nothing has changed since the end of communism in 1991, that, yeah, you can run a place of worship, but you have to be a police informer, and this holds good in most erstwhile Soviet states. Anyway, Yanukovych, he'd been sent to prison for fairly serious crimes in the Soviet era, but he was Moscow's man. He's the one they wanted to win the presidency in 2004. Remember, in eastern Ukraine, a lot of people are ethnically Russian and linguistically Russian, depending on what you consider ethnically Russian. There are some surnames which are clearly Russian or not, but just because you have the surname doesn't mean you're that much Russian or that much Ukrainian, because there's only father's father. Like in Ireland, we have people who've got typically English surnames like Bird or Wilson. Doesn't mean they're English, although they will have a little bit of English ancestry at least. And the thing is, some people might be fully ethnically Ukrainian, and I know some people, but don't speak the Ukrainian language, can only speak Russian. Because the 1920s in the Soviet Union, the Ukrainian language was allowed, no attempt to discourage it. In the 1930s, that policy shifted dramatically, and it was very much discouraged. And instruction in school became almost exclusively through Russian. It was really downgraded. Some Ukrainian nationalists in the Second World War battled for the independence of Ukraine, and they accepted German help. And this is always used by the Russian government to say that it's a Nazi thing. Now, it's true they cooperated with the Nazis, but, people who wanted Indian independence, they cooperated with the Nazis. Are they evil? Some Zionists cooperated with the Nazis. Does that mean Zionism is necessarily wrong? The Soviet Union actively, enthusiastically assisted the Nazis, giving them naval bases, giving them loads of, selling them loads of things that they needed. In 1939, 1940, was their co-belligerent against Poland. So really, this argument doesn't work well for Putin and his cabal, who are so nostalgic about the Soviet Union. And like in any sort of nationalism, there is the far end of it, which can be vicious and racist, and some of them are very anti-Polish as well. Some of them are anti-Semitic. But much of that was barbarous, but none of that reflects discredit on modern Ukrainian nationalists. And you know the so-called far-right parties in Ukraine, what percentage of the vote they get? 2%. But on that basis, Moscow tries to suggest that any Ukrainian who believes in Ukrainian independence or doesn't want to be ruled by Russia, any of them, anyone who says that is a Nazi, which is obviously ludicrous, totally mendacious and grossly offensive. And you see real ultranationalism encouraged in Russia, chauvinism, racism, and hyper-aggression, just attacking other countries. One of my Russian pupils wanted to take it all over these countries because it was part of the Russian Empire. But why is that a good thing? Why should they want that? Much of Russia is part of the Mongolian Empire. Should it be part of the Mongolian Empire? I don't think so. I mean, does the UK get to rule all the lands it once ruled? This is ludicrous. Yeah, Ukraine is independent because it was agreed to. Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, they all agreed to split. That's why we have diplomatic relations. That means you acknowledge their independence. So people in eastern Ukraine often regard themselves as Russian, and likewise in Crimea, because Crimea was part of the Russian Soviet Socialist Federative Republic until I think it's about 1960, when Khrushchev, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, he decided to reassign it from Russia to Ukraine. In those days, it was like an invisible line on a map in the middle of one country, in a sense, didn't appear to make any difference, and it remained mostly Russian-speaking. There's some indigenous people there who are Tatars. But then obviously this took on a new significance after 1991, when the Soviet Union was dissolved. So Russia wished to keep its Black Sea Fleet there, and the Ukrainians bent over backwards to accommodate them, making a special administrative region, allowing the Russian Black Sea Fleet to be there, allowing Russian to be the primary language there, as well as Ukrainian and Tatar, and so forth. So a lot was done to be very accommodating to Russian wishes there. And how was this generosity repaid? It was repaid with treachery. I'm not anti-Russian in the least. I spent 2 years in Moscow. Some Russians I'm very fond of. I've had Russian girlfriends. There's a lot I admire about Russia. Certain Russian government policies are despicable, and this would be an example of that. So Yanukovych, he failed to become president in 2004. The Orange Revolution, mass protests prevented him. He cheated a lot in the elections. So that was a big setback for Vlad Putin. But anyway, later on in 2014, he became president. There were huge protests against him. The police shot dead over 100 people in Kiev. Yanukovych fled to Moscow, where he remains to this day. So shortly after that, Russia invaded Ukraine. And of course, the Kremlin lied and lied and lied through its teeth, told the most bare-faced lies when Russian-speaking men in Russian army uniforms, insignia removed, with Russian-issued weapons, turned up, coming in the direction of Russia. And they were not Russian, we're told, until suddenly Moscow shouted from the rooftops, "These are our men." I mean, there are just countless absolutely blatant lies told about this. You should look up the work of Boris Nemtsov. He was former deputy prime minister of Russia way back in the 90s, and he spoke out against this needless expansionism, this chauvinism, this mindless need to get more territory. You've got the vastest area of any country in the world. Why on earth do you need more land? Why not solve actual problems like climate change or poverty or better public services or corruption? But, it's all this megalomania on the part of Putin. It's obviously small man syndrome written large. I've got more tanks than you've got. I've got more land than you've got. Projection, being hyper-aggressive and blaming others. So it's very dispiriting and sickening. And obviously, he's got these self-esteem issues like Trump, which is why he's always bragging. Anyway, obviously, Ukraine is not perfect. Yeah, there is corruption and there was a lot of flaws in their elections, the early years, things like that, but it is making progress and it has got a free media, certainly much freer than Russia. And some Russians would quite like the rights that Ukrainians have got. You know, in Russia, we can be labeled an extremist. The definition of that is anything the government doesn't like. And Jehovah's Witnesses are banned. I mean, I don't agree with their faith, but they shouldn't be sent to prison for just expressing their religious beliefs. You can't try and convert people. That's religious propaganda. So how do people become Christians? Remind me. They weren't around preaching their faith. So it's oppressive. It's not the Soviet level of oppression, but it's part of a worrying trend of surveilling people more, being authoritarian, of banning so many things, of the rule by fear, of hammering people down, and massive kleptocracy. Having said that, it's still better off than it was under communism in almost every regard. So Crimea was annexed by Russia, and then they invaded an area called Donbass. Of course, Russian troops are there, and Moscow has lied and lied and lied about this, constantly putting out these mendacious statements. So saying it's an internal conflict, what a huge lie. Why on earth is Russia part of the peace negotiations? Because it's a belligerent. Where do these pro-Moscow rebels get their weapons? Oh, they're from Russia, of course. Eastern Ukraine, it's got only one country. The Ukrainian government's not going to give them. They're only bordering Russia. They've obviously got them from Russia. But people say, oh, they were left over before the Soviet Union. Some of these are provably of post-1991 manufacture. And even the ones of pre-91 manufacture. Where do you think they got the ammunition from? Do you think they didn't run out of ammunition in 5.5 years? So the attempts to take over other cities like Mariupol, Berdyansk, and Odessa. So this is obviously fighting illegally. If the Russian Federation declared war on the Ukraine, that would be one thing. That would be a lawful war, but it hasn't. Okay, it's fighting covertly, sending various mercenaries. Even the Russian government has admitted that troops have been allowed to go on leave and gone there, and the Russian government's done nothing to stop them. So these volunteers and the Donbass People's Republic and so forth, that's Russia's puppet state over there. Some people are Russian citizens, people who were never Ukrainian citizens, who didn't live in the Ukraine previously, who crossed over there before they took it over. So it's unlawful violence in furtherance of a political objective. That is terrorism. That's the statute book definition of terrorism. And so Russia's so anti-terrorist, which obviously just means like a journalist usually or a peaceful protester, needlessly starting this conflict, which has killed at least 13,000 people. Obviously, there have been sanctions, and so, yeah, that's hurt the Russian economy, none of which would have happened if they hadn't attacked Ukraine. You don't like the president of Ukraine? Tough. It's an internal matter. We're always told to butt out of Russian matters and let them make their own choices. But unfortunately, the Russian government is not respecting the choice of the Ukrainian people. Now, the Ukrainians have downgraded the Russian language in their country, and not surprisingly, well, I mean, it's up to them. They're a sovereign state. They're absolutely entitled to decide what they're going to do about Russian language policy. And Russia does the same, and that's why some minority language activists have got on hunger strike and things like that. And they only started really downgrading the Russian language in response to the fact they were invaded. And they have a distinct identity, and that's that, and they want to speak the Ukrainian language. I mean, I know it's related to the Russian language, but unfortunately, some people in Russia are bigoted, don't accept it as a real language, and things like that. Some of them have got a very distasteful and contemptuous attitude towards their Ukrainian neighbours. If they really are your Soviet brothers, if you like them, don't attack them, don't kill them, don't try and steal your land. Ukraine has never claimed a centimetre of Russian soil, and on and on. There are loads of ethnic minority groups in Russia, indigenous minorities, and they're not allowed to go independent like most Chechens in the early 90s went independent. They give a very good impression of it, with putting up such a fight against the Russian army, successfully actually, first time. Now, I don't want Chechen independence, I don't oppose it either, I don't really care actually. And I know there were some vicious people ruling it, but I still think most people in Chechnya wanted independence. Maybe I'm wrong, but let them have a vote on it then. So, you're not allowed to have a separatist party in Russia. You're not allowed to have a party proposing dividing the territory, independence for some part or other. And yet the Russian government is so actively promoting Scottish separatism, Catalan separatism, trying to enfeeble and split up other sovereign states, whilst being violently intolerant of separatist movements within the Russian Federation. So anyway, and obviously Russia hacked the US election in 2016. There's an absolute mountain of evidence. There's irrefutable proof of that. And they will do this to lie and lie and lie, no matter how obvious the proof is against them. Same like downing that Malaysia Airlines plane. I don't think the pro-Russian rebels did it deliberately. I think it was a mistake. There's no interest for them in killing about 300 civilians, mostly from neutral countries. It was an accident. Obviously, they won't admit it. That plane wouldn't have been shot down if Russia hadn't started the conflict and provided them with the weapons. And on and on. There's so much proof that obviously that it was them. I've talked about it elsewhere because there were no Russian army planes flying over there. So the Ukrainian Air Force and the Ukrainian ground forces weren't shooting down any aircraft. The pro-Russian rebels were. They shot down two Ukrainian aircraft the day before. So not surprising they shot down another one. And again, there's evidence of that. There's voice intercepts there, social media posts when they boast about this. And as for the Ukrainians being attacked by Russian troops, I mean, hundreds of Russian troops have been killed. They've had their funerals in Russia. There's loads of information about it in public domain sources. The union of soldiers, of Russian soldiers' mothers, and so on. Anyway, so after they attempted to sway the US election towards Donald Trump, US Congress recognized that. They passed this bipartisan act to supply more weapons to Ukraine. It's passed by both parties. Both parties signed and voted that they recognized that Russia had tried to interfere in their election. Donald Trump signed into law this same act, providing more weapons to Ukraine. Anyway, Volodymyr Zelensky was elected president of Ukraine in 2019, and there was a lot of bull on the Russian state media, and it's all state media really, saying that his predecessor Petro Poroshenko had fled the country, was going to be arrested, none of which has happened. So many bold lies that are told and proven to be false, and yet people still continue believing this bullshit narrative. So part of the meta-narrative is poor little Russia beset on all sides by foes and attacked, which is nonsense, and trying to claim that there's victimhood of the Russian ethnic minority in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, who could leave if they don't like it, will give it far greater rights than they are in Russia to say what they want, to go where they want, to be gay if they want, to have whatever religious belief they want. But, the Russian language might be downgraded there because it's an independent country. They don't have to keep the language going. You can speak it if you want to, but it doesn't have to have any co-official status anymore. And then, obviously, Putin would then attack this democracy, claiming he's protecting the Russian ethnic minority. How would you feel if another country invaded the Russian Federation to protect their ethnic minority? Not quite so keen. Anyway, so Donald Trump is worried about Joe Biden entering the race against him next time to be president of the United States. Joe Biden, of course, was vice president under Obama. And Joe Biden's son, Hunter, he briefly worked for a gas company in Ukraine called Burisma. So there was some sort of investigation going to Burisma about 2 years before Hunter Biden got that job. And then Donald Trump, who's obviously one of the most corrupt and dishonest people around, who's told how many thousands of provable lies on the record since he became president. He then accused Joe Biden of trying to cover something up, of some investigation implicating his son, and manipulating the Ukraine's investigations to get a prosecutor fired. But anyway, so Trump wants some bad news on Biden. So then he's speaking to President Zelensky on the phone. Obviously, Ukraine is outnumbered by Russia like 4-1. And they didn't have such a big budget. They don't have any oil, hardly any gas, things like that. So they can't afford the big weapons. They've got no nukes because they gave them up, trusting their Russian friends and cousins not to attack them. And some Russians will be just as aghast as I am about this needless war of aggression against a friendly country. This bullying and brutality. Trump is saying, okay, I will give you the weapons, and you can. There's the transcript, and I think they still haven't released the full thing, and it's confirmed by various people who heard what Trump was saying, and it's confirmed by documents, saying, okay, I will release the weapons, but you do me a favor. You want a meeting in the White House and all the rest of it. You want the arms. You've got to give me some bad news on Joe Biden. Okay, some dirt, something to embarrass him, something to weaken him in the 2020 presidential campaign. So there, Trump is skewing foreign policy for personal gain, even though that's bad for the United States as a whole, because of course Ukraine is a United States ally. Ukraine's not actually a member of NATO, but it's still an ally of the United States. And the Russian Federation's adversary, certainly. Obviously, the Russian government comes out with many anti-American statements, certainly sees the United States as a rival, even an enemy, has broken into the Democratic National Committee's computers and tried to tilt the election towards Trump because they thought Trump would do their bidding. He's beholden to them for financial reasons. They may well have a tape of him being urinated on by prostitutes on a visit to Russia, so possibly blackmail over him. But the weapons were going to be withheld if President Zelensky didn't play ball. Now, what Zelensky was asking to do was unethical, but unsurprisingly, he probably agreed because their backs are to the wall. We're at war here. We do whatever we can to win. People have been killed every day. We can't afford to be too sanctimonious. He could not refuse. It was in his national interest to give Trump what he wanted. Obviously, the Ukrainian government is now desperate to stay out of this internal American row because Trump is 12% behind in the approval ratings. Looks like he's going to lose next year. But even in the meantime, he's going to be president for over a year, till January 2021. Got to get along with him. We could cut off arms completely. But don't want to, hello there, Nicola, don't want to alienate the Democrats because they may well provide the next president. So would really rather be neutral on this one. But anyway, the Congress found out all about this. Impeaching hearings have gone ahead in the House of Representatives. So we talk about this from the Democrats for ages. There are so many illegal, unethical things that the Trump administration has done. It's just staggering. The abuse of power, the refusal to provide documents when the court subpoenas demanded them. How do they do this? How do they get away with this? How are there not consequences? It is just mind-boggling. But Trump long ago discovered that if you're very wealthy and well-connected, you can get away with well nigh all, probably murder, because obviously some lawyers are far more expensive than others. Why would you pay a lawyer $1 million when you could have got one for free as a court-appointed one? Why? Why do you get that? What's the extra value you get for your $1 million? Well, obviously, you get an outcome that you would not otherwise have got. Is that justice? Surely not. That rich people are going to get better outcomes from courts than poorer people. Wealthier people are going to be acquitted when a poor person in the same situation would be convicted. Even if a rich person is convicted, his sentence will be less than it would be for a poor person precisely because he's got an abler lawyer. Anyway, so Rudolph Giuliani has weighed in. Remember, he's the former mayor of New York. He's Trump's lawyer, but he's mostly not actually doing legal work. He's going on television, acting as a spokesman for Trump, telling barefaced lies for Trump, saying things like truth isn't truth, which I think ought to be really the epitaph of the Trump administration. And interfering in foreign policy. What on earth is he doing? He's Trump's lawyer. He's not a State Department official. He's not a diplomat. He's Trump's personal lawyer. He doesn't work for the office of the presidency as such. Why is he poking his nose in? I mean, do you think there'd be a clear chain of command in the State Department and all that? So the impeachment hearings have gone ahead, and then there are spurious claims now that the Ukrainian government hacked the Democratic National Committee survey. Why they would they want to do that? Over 3 years after the event, people are coming out with this ludicrous version of events without offering a scrap of evidence and support, despite people giving absolute chapter and verse on the departments of the Russian intelligence service who did this, despite Fancy Bear being well known about it, the various troll farms in St. Petersburg and Moscow. Despite a superabundance of evidence proving exactly how it happened, some people will still believe complete twaddle. It's very dispiriting that the willful stupidity and the dishonesty of a large number of people in all sorts of countries. Giuliani doesn't have the excuse of stupidity. He's decided to take Trump's side no matter what is done. So bogus accusations are hurled at the Ukrainians. There's no gain for them. That it was a false flag to then try and blame it on the Russians, a rather convoluted explanation. But anyway, Trump's saying, why should we give corruption to such a corrupt money to such a corrupt nation as Ukraine? Well, there is much joy in heaven over every sinner who repenteth. Trump is suddenly concerned about corruption, despite what he was willing to do, laundering money for the Russian mob and so on, and using his hotels really for bribery, breaching the emoluments clause, foreign embassies holding diplomatic soiree in Trump hotels because they know that Trump will give them sweetheart deals, or directing the US military to stay in his hotels, just to trying to keep a Scottish airport open because it's good for his golf resort. I mean, it is jaw-dropping. How does he get away with this? And at least 40% of Americans are still on his side. And Staggeringly, support for him has gone up slightly since the impeachments commenced. Some people really got their head in the sand. No matter what happens, they're on his side. People like Prince Andrew don't have this. That he did acquitted himself very poorly in an interview, but they're not people springing to his defence and believing twaddle just because it reflects well on him. So anyway, there was a cadre of Trump appointees who were testifying against him. And so Trump will always say, oh, the so-and-so is a liar, it's a hoax. What's a hoax? Nothing's a hoax. None of the testimony is false, so far as I know. I don't know of a word of it has been proven to be false. The documents aren't forgeries. No one's claimed that. What is the hoax here? He really did have conversations with Zelensky, and he really did pressurize him to do what Trump is said to have done with regard to Hunter Biden. Even Trump acknowledges that. And so this is where the Republicans go in the House of Representatives, that we can't have testimony from those who actually heard what was said, because that's hearsay. We can't have documents. I don't know why those don't count. And we can't have Trump's own word used. So absolutely no evidence is ever admissible. Now, I realize this is not a court of law. It is a political and not a judicial process. But the US Constitution provides for a procedure whereby a president can be removed from office for high crimes and misdemeanors, and well, these are felonies. Obviously, it's a high treason because he's going against his own declared policy, against US defense policy. He's trying to enfeeble that in order to increase his personal chances of re-election. Not thinking he's doing anything good for the United States, constantly breaking the Constitution, which he claimed to uphold, to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. That was his presidential oath. Obviously, undermining so many of its rights, disrespecting some of its institutions, disobeying its laws and its courts and so forth. Wow. Anyway, so he's often inveighing against career foreign service officers, people who've served the United States for decades, are completely honourable, and they're traduced by him. And there was a convention, you simply don't do that sort of thing, whether they're military personnel or in the State Department or in any federal agency. No, it's wrong to do that. And he's done this before against the CIA, against the FBI, against Homeland Security. All the intelligence agencies were saying, yeah, Russia did hack our election. And despite that, despite the experts who paid billions to do it, despite them saying it, no, it's not true, he will lie and lie and lie. And yet, a considerable minority of Americans believe him against the experts in the field, against what's more than a consensus in the intelligence community. So it really is nauseating and disgraceful that he should badmouth these public servants like that, trying to trash their reputation. And so the Republicans are being totally partisan. It's blind faith on their part. So they're careening from one implausible defence to another, as they've done over so many issues, whether it's Stormy Daniels or whether it's the hacking thing in the first instance, or whether it's the border wall or the child separations. And obviously Russia is a party to this conflict in Ukraine, has invaded Ukraine and taken over a lot of its land, sometimes under the guise of the Donbass People's Republic. They've done the same with regard to Georgia, with North Ossetia, with Abkhazia and Transnistria in Moldova. They've done it for decades, illegally occupying the territory of friendly sovereign states, which have done them no harm. And why? Russia's lost tens of billions of dollars from sanctions to get more land, which they totally don't need. There was one Russian politician in the Duma, that's the lower house of the parliament, who valiantly voted against this aggression, the illegal seizure of Crimea. He then moved to Ukraine and was shot dead, presumably by a Russian agent. Who else would do it? Critics of Putin have a habit of meeting a very violent death, and the killer's never caught. Boris Nemtsov shot dead within the shadow of the Kremlin. That former deputy prime minister, who published a document showing from all the public sources all that the Russian government had done to invade little Ukraine, which had done them no harm, which is only trying to hold on to its territory. So there are ultra-nationalists in Russia, like the Liberal Democrat Party, and Putin is pretty ultra-nationalist himself, trying to promote this really antiquated version of Russianness. He's a communist but thinks that Tsars are great. I mean, it's vile. What's the common thread here? I suppose intolerance, the rule by fear, oppression. That's what he admires. Not freedom of speech, not actually serving the public. And kleptocracy, stealing billions from ordinary people. That's why Russia's one of the most unequal societies in the world. But why is Russia part of the Minsk agreement, like the Ukraine conflict? If it's not involved in the conflict, of course it's involved. You might say, what about Germany and France and so on? Yeah, they're involved because they're NATO countries and they fund and they arm Ukraine. They're allowed to. They're open about that. The US is open too. They don't lie about that. It's Russia lies about funding and arming the rebels and indeed sending soldiers to fight on the side of the rebels. And what else about this? What France and Germany are doing. So they have a formal agreement with the sovereign state. Giving military aid to a sovereign state is lawful. Giving military aid to an illegal organization is not. So obviously the Russian government is a state sponsor of terrorism. I'm not anti-Russian at all. I don't wish harm to Russians, and there are lots of Russians in my like, and there are admirable things about Russia, from literature to music to architecture to cuisine. But I'm just telling the plain truth that the Russian government's policy towards Ukraine is appalling and should worry us. And obviously, there's a precedent. If they get away with this, where's the next step? The conflict does appear to be winding down because they paid quite a price. They got Crimea and Donbass. They would like to keep them in some term. Can they end the conflict now? Otherwise, it's going to drag on for another 5 years. Several thousand more people get killed, cost them a lot more money. But they're thinking that maybe Western countries will eventually get tired of propping up Ukraine and give up. And so they want to do everything they can to besmirch Ukraine's reputation, say there's a lot of embezzlement, and there is quite a lot of embezzlement, but Ukraine does at least have a free media, is trying to tackle the issue, whereas obviously Russia is a mafia state. And, the FSB, that's the Federalная служба безопасности, the Federal Security Service, it's the internal one. They're in league with gangsters a lot. So is Служба внешней разведка, the external intelligence agency, as in the kind of people who killed Sergei Skripal. They're often in bed with organized crime. And to a lesser extent, Главное разведка управления, the main intelligence directorate of the army. They have a more military approach. They're the ones more like to go out and kill, probably kill Skripal. SVR will be more gathering intelligence. So it's probably the GRU, the suspect in the GRU, rather than the SVR. Not that the SVR never kill people, they occasionally do. There was this Normandy agreement, according to the Steinmeier formula. Normandy talks going ahead, supposedly to end the Ukraine conflict, but be much too early, much too premature to think that it's definitely over. So disengagement is meant to go ahead, and so far it's proceeding, pulling back both sides. Exchange of prisoners, this corridor between at Luhansk to allow civilians to leave, go back and forth. The ships that Russia seized last year to be returned. Of course, international law found in favor of Ukraine. The International Court, the Ukrainian ships were allowed to go to their ports of Berdyansk and Mariupol. So the Ukrainians would like to control their border with Ukraine again and hold elections. Do most people in Donbass, do they want to become part of Russia or perhaps independence? I think they do, actually, but that doesn't mean you necessarily get it. That's not the way sovereignty works. Many countries contain a minority who do not wish to be part of that country, but tough, usually you have to. And Russia is very much for this, not allowing Tatarstan, Bashkirstan, Tatarstan, Ingushetia, Dagestan to go independent. Do most people want to go independent? I don't know. They might do, but they wouldn't be allowed to even express a view. That would be so-called extremism. Be sent to prison if you expressed a view that the government doesn't like. Obviously, they got these rigged elections in Russia, where genuine opposition candidates are usually disbarred on these implausible excuses, and the pro-Putin candidates stand under the banner of the United Russia Party or the Communist Party of the Liberal Democrats, or even Spravlenia России, like A Just Russia. They might even create an ecological party to take away votes from genuine opposition parties, and then hugely stuffed ballot boxes. So just using every trick in the book, using every arm of the state, using state media to constantly build up Putin and to denigrate his opponents so they cannot be ignored. Democracy activists or human rights activists, journalists, regularly having drugs planted at them, being called paedophiles, being falsely accused of things like that. It's shocking and very dispiriting. They get away with it, but really there's not much chance that the Putin cult is going to end, and they'll probably hand over to Sergei Shoigu in a couple of years' time when Putin retires. He's only slightly younger than him. He'll carry on in the same vein. And Putin's always posing as a hard man, going around with his chest on show. I mean, it's pathetic, wearing his cross and so on. He's so tough, macho man, action man. You know, in January, for the baptism of Christ, jumping into the river. Wow, what a guy! He's so holy. You're such a Christian. What about mercy? What about loving your enemies? You don't believe in that sort of bit. And by the way, I obviously castigate some Americans too for being a bit like him. And Putin, who was never actually a soldier, not for a single day, he was in Komitet Государственной безопасности, the State Security Committee, as in he would have been rounding up human rights activists, hippies, harmless people, peace activists, and sending them to the gulag, beating them up, torturing them, not actually fighting, living this charmed life, living a privileged life, precisely because he was willing to be an oppressor, to rigidly and viciously enforce conformism and stop people who were peacefully struggling for justice, for fair trials, against the abuse of psychiatry, where mentally healthy people were deliberately misdiagnosed as mentally deranged and thrown into a psychiatric hospital, drugged up to their eyeballs, put in a cell with some deeply disturbed people, which might actually turn you insane. So that's how psychiatry was abused in the Soviet Union. And it all came out in the wash in the 90s when the archives were opened, when Russia's very relaxed about this thing. Because the Soviet government had again told the most barefaced lies almost incessantly about the abuse of psychiatry as a means of political persecution. And it all came back again. And how inadequate do you have to be to try and bully gays, as Putin does, claiming that there's homosexual propaganda, that it's paedophilic to tell people, yeah, some people are gay, or things like that. Anyway, so there we are. Anyway, I wish Putin really didn't exist and Russia could be a free country with free elections and freedom of expression and prosperity and better public services, and then maybe people will be happier and not always sizing up to the West and trying to seize more land and invade people and forming this sort of this axis of evil with the most oppressive governments in the world, with North Korea and China, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and so forth. And not to say there's nothing that the NATO's done wrong. NATO's done bad things too. And NATO's made the wrong decision, and sometimes NATO's been the wrong side of conflicts. The moment is usually not, though. So there we are. Anyway, so Trump, well, he'll lose the vote in the House of Representatives because that's mostly Democrat. Go up to the Senate, trial in the Senate, and he'll almost certainly be acquitted. Remember, you needed 2/3 majority to remove him, and the Democrats have only got 48 people in the Senate, so they're not going to get anywhere near. The moment there's no sign of any any Republicans there breaking ranks, you need a few brave souls, some rebels, but it's not going to happen. I am told things can change very quickly, though, if the polls move a bit like in the whole gay marriage issue. When the polls moved, and a lot of Republicans suddenly changed their mind if he thinks that he hurts their chance of re-election. The thing is, if Mike Pence was a Republican's candidate next time, would they have a better chance? I think they would, actually, because there are not so many skeletons in his cupboard. He hasn't lied so much. But anyway, the Republican Party has largely become Trumpists. There are very few people who have found the moral courage to raise their voice against this absolute charlatan and monster, Donald Trump. I really wish he would die in agony right now. He's vile. He's sheer evil. It's hard to think of anything he's done that's good. He's just nauseating, which is not to say that his enemies aren't ogres. Sometimes they are, in the case of ISIS. But obviously he'll embrace people who are not much better than ISIS, as in Mohammed bin Salman. Okay, so and that the thing is, I'm worried about this impeachment process is that it might actually strengthen him when he wins. It might actually go up in the polls. Shockingly, he's gone up slightly in the polls since the whole proceeding started. And just because he's won a vote because of blind loyalty to him, he'll say, you see, there was nothing here. Schiff and Pelosi's strategy is to get the truth out there so people can pressure their senators. Yeah, maybe. I don't think it's going to really work. He's always going to have at least 35% of people on his side. Now, I know he won the presidency with 46% of the popular vote, and he needs every one of those last time. He's also quite fortunate with how it was distributed across the key swing states. Now, Hillary had very high negatives. It's important the Democrats don't select a candidate who is just so unpopular. Here is evil hearted giving out. Well, I know he was rushed to hospital the other weekend with no explanation given. Oh, sorry, a ludicrously implausible one. It was his routine checkup, which isn't due for a few months. Come on. And he's the healthiest president ever, we're told by his doctor. I mean, yet another very obvious falsehood. The man is, how old is he now? 73, and he binge eats junk food. He's clearly clinically obese. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. I'm obese, but don't pretend to be particularly healthy. He's at 73. He was healthier than Kennedy at 43. Are you out of your mind? I know Kennedy had some health problems, but still. And Trump, who never takes exercise, who's so torpid, he won't even walk around his golf course, always takes a golf cart, has got all these signs of pre-Alzheimer's, can't cope with stairs, forgetful, keeps wandering off, disorientated, who can scarcely finish a sentence, slurs his speech, not far off aphasia. I wish he was struck by that. I'd love to see him collapse in public and really humiliate himself. So he'll win in the Senate, unfortunately. There we are. And I remember, wasn't he trying to say that this impeachment process was illegal? Again, that was daft. The US Constitution specifically provides for this. It's spelt out. I mean, there have been lots of impeachments in the United States. Now, this is only the third against the presidency, so far as I know. Fourth, I mean, we have gerrymandering. It's a crapshoot every election. Anyway, the good massive turnout. Well, you're right. So many districts are just non-competitive. But bear in mind, about 60 million American adults who did not vote. If they voted, that would change anything. Historical question. I was once told that Ukraine's assisted in the Holocaust, yet others told me the Germans did not like Ukraine, so you can comment. Okay, so obviously most of Ukraine was under German military occupation from 1941 to 1944, and there was a considerable Jewish community there, and many Jewish people there were murdered in the Holocaust. So Ukrainians have been so barbarously treated by the Soviet government that they thought anything's got to be better. The Soviet government had lied to them so much when they said that Nazism was terrible. Maybe that was a lie too. Remember, in the early 30s, there had been a famine, and several million Ukrainians had starved to death in that famine, at least 3 million, at least. It was completely deliberately created. This was a time of rapid economic growth, when food was taken almost literally from the mouths of children to be exported to buy more equipment. And the Soviet government controlled everything, controlled almost every ear of corn, and it was a control freak state, as Russia is today, with a secret police everywhere. The Soviet Union government knew exactly what was going on and controlled everything. There was a totalitarian state, so that was deliberately created. So there's so much hatred for the Soviet government. So yes, they were invaded, and there was some anti-Semitism in Ukraine, as there was in most European countries. Unfortunately, I don't know, anti-Semitism is utterly odious. And so some Ukrainians who'd been in the Soviet army, they were captured by the Germans, and you could be a slave laborer, and you could be slowly starved to death, or you could help the Third Reich. And some of the Ukrainians chose to help the Third Reich just to stay alive, just to have a ration that would keep them alive. And of the Soviet troops who fell into German hands, that's Ukrainian, Russian, Kazakhs, whoever, 60% of them died. 60% of them died from starvation, beatings, overwork, whatever, lack of any medical care, exposure to the cold. Compare that to the Britishers in German hands, only 2% of whom died. So your life is on the line. It's a matter of life or death. Would you work for the Germans or not? I would have. I know it's immoral, just to survive. And some of those Ukrainians who worked for the Third Reich participated in the Holocaust. Yes, it's true. And I know that's disgraceful. But none of that reflects on Ukrainians generally. Germans aren't bad today because of the Holocaust, which obviously was evil on an absolutely gigantic scale. Some Russians participated in the Holocaust, I think very, very few. That doesn't mean the Russians are bad or responsible for that today. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in Russia in the old days, even a little bit now. Okay, so evil things have been done by people of every nationality. Genocide has happened in every country in the world, which is not to say that being proud of your country is evil or to be linked to the Holocaust or you shouldn't want independence or whatever. So this is the Kremlin's playbook. Back to Soviet times, you're either on our side or else you're a Nazi. Okay, people of moderate opinion, whether liberal, conservative, or whatever, they're all Nazis unless you agree with us, which is ludicrous. I mean, who's really Nazi? Look at Putin's system. It's not as bad as Nazis. It's not all the way there. It's not genocide, though. Yes, his forces deliberately did kill large numbers of civilians in Chechnya, for instance. Muzzling the free press, controlling the judiciary, militarism, this cult of the personality, hyper-nationalism. What else could I say? Persecution of religious minorities, official homophobia, and on and on. I mean, there's really a checklist of something like fascism. And there are quite a few criteria that he satisfied. You're most welcome. Your family escaped. My uncles were sent to Siberia and lost, indeed. So many people were so badly oppressed. And by that Ukrainian famine in the early 30s, was it really anti-Ukrainian? I'm not so sure it was anti-Ukrainian because, okay, people died of starvation in Russia at the same time, not the same proportion, and in Kazakhstan and elsewhere. But then there were other aspects which makes it does seem like it was a racist thing because the Ukrainian clergy were particularly persecuted and usually killed, not sent to the gulag, because they were living repositories of Ukrainian national identity, and there were Ukrainian minstrels who were blind men who wandered the country, reciting poems and singing songs. So again, they were like living oracles of a Ukrainian national patrimony. And the NKVD, that's the Народный Commissariat Внутренних дел, like the People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs, they arrested them, they tortured them, and they usually murdered them. Because they'd gone around untouched because there was a very strong moral principle. You do not hurt the disabled. Who would rob a blind man? That would be the lowest of the low. And the NKVD killed these people in the most sadistic possible fashion. It's absolutely revolting. NKVD, some of them are Russian, some of them Ukrainian, some of them are all sorts of nationalities, Latvian or Georgian or whatever, is not trying to lay at the door of one nationality. So I'm afraid the Soviet government was absolutely barbaric, was evil on an absolutely enormous scale. Now, by the 80s, it was only somewhat oppressive, but earlier on, it was satanic. You can see because Stalin was such an antichrist, some people thought Hitler mustn't be that bad by comparison. And obviously, Hitler was also satanic, but people didn't know that in the early days. Anyway, so Trump will probably get off. I think Trump will lose the next election. I'm far from sure. I would give him at this stage about a 40% chance of winning re-election, but a lot could happen with the economy, with conflicts elsewhere, and much obviously depends on who the Democrats pick as their nominee. All right, so I'm going to sign off now. So please follow me on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. Please donate to me. I need your donations to keep this channel going. georgecallahan79@gmail.com, or on Patreon. Book me for online lessons for history, politics, religious studies, geography, anything like that, linguistics, philology, French, and what else do I do? I translate from various languages: French, Spanish, Italian, German, Romanian, Russian. I edit documents. Book me as a tour guide in London. You can direct message me here. Okay, good night, everyone.